Hi guys, Jen George here, back for round 2 of our Facebook Live interviews. Today we're here with Billy Tucker from Oneflare, and we're going to, as usual, hear what Billy's been up to and how he got to Oneflare. Billy, so what happened before Oneflare? What did you do? Yeah.
How did this happen? That's what I was thinking.
Sorry.
So look, I'm a 10-year Microsoft veteran.
Yep.
I started in London back in 2001, so it was a wee while ago, and worked in the Xbox business. So came all the way through Microsoft, a couple of different countries, a few different roles, and left Microsoft in 2010 to set up a company called Kudo, which was an online deal
like
space
thing.
Yeah, we talked about a once-in-a-lifetime market opportunity, and I think that was right. You know, there was a lot of really incredible growth stories around that time. So fascinating business, awesome experience, loved it to bits. The business, the best description I think is there was a tipping point when the business somewhat outgrew my capability, and we also discovered the business had grown so rapidly that in fact a lot of the baseline processes that we should have had to help us scale hadn't been properly formed. And so it was a business that was a little bit teetering on the edge, and we were just enjoying and lapping up explosive growth. So I finished at Kudo in 2012, did some consulting, joined the advisory board of Kmart, did some startups, tried in vain to sell a business to American Express, who I think still use the business, and then went to a management buyout media company. So it's been
Bit of everything.
It's been a bit of a journey with a big corporate backdrop.
Favorite Xbox game though? Sure, you would have played 1 or 2 at Microsoft.
Look. Oh my god! So the only game, the only game that I would play now is whatever their big equivalent to Gran Turismo is, their big driving game. But that's really it. I've never, you know what? We were encouraged at Microsoft back in London in Soho to all have an Xbox on our desk, dual monitors. I never used mine.
Fair enough. You probably watch it. Some people watching are going to be going, "Oh my god, are you kidding?"
I know it was the weirdest thing. Yeah. But I had 2 cousins who enjoyed a lot of demo games.
Yep.
So they used to get them through the post now and again. So I was favourite uncle for a while.
That's good. Fair enough. Good to know. So with coming onto Oneflare, you know, what attracted you to a startup like this?
Look, here's the interesting thing, and this might well form a theme throughout the discussion, is I hadn't really heard of the business. And so that was fascinating to me, because when I saw the revenue that the business was generating, when I saw some of the SEO capability of the business, and I had a friend of mine, so in the MBO we had a business called Hopfrog, which was a global directory player that had been largely smashed by Panda in 2012. And so I had a very capable manager from Hopfrog have a look at that business, have a look at Oneflare, and he was super impressed by the way the site had been built, by the SEO effects that had been built in, by its ability, its page rank, etc. And so you've got a business that, in terms of broad optics, was doing a phenomenal job and nipping at the heels of the incumbent. And yet, from a brand awareness, I hadn't heard of it. In fact, many people haven't heard of it. And so I thought this is a really terrific opportunity to take something, and once the product journey is right, then give it some brand presence and help it explode.
Definitely.
And so that's where we're at.
So from, you know, there's a lot of day 1 or first year or 2 startups that generally watch these. From the experience of what you've seen with Oneflare and from your experience with other businesses, if you had to start something like this again, what would be the 3 things that you would focus on in the first year?
So if I had to start, bearing in mind I didn't start Oneflare, so
hindsight's a funny thing, right?
You know what? The fundamental effects of our SEO have been just incredible. I think there's a decent argument to have been slightly more thoughtful about brand. Brand is a difficult thing. To some extent today, because I think our product journey isn't quite what it should be, I think we somewhat benefit from our anonymity. Now, we're discovered primarily through customers' research journeys, so they're on Google, they're looking for a plumber or an electrician or an accountant or a cleaner, and Oneflare comes up because we rank so well, and we capture the customer. But had our brand have more exposure, the likelihood is we get more type-ins, and we probably find, like many do in marketplaces like ours, that we struggle to supply. So in a lot of ways we can we can generate almost unlimited demand from consumers looking for jobs, but we struggle with supply from the accountants, the cleaners, the builders, the painters. Now, a lot of those guys, ironically, will say, well, that's crazy, because they want new work. And it's how do you bring those things together in an effective way? Now, the arbitrage is phenomenal, but it's how do you bring those together to drive liquidity, as you know.
So with that marketplace liquidity, you know, I know you have a lot of thoughts around what some things that can be done to have quick wins. What are some things that startups should be looking at to start with when they're first getting started?
To build liquidity?
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, so my view on liquidity, for instance, and I think this is maybe the third point of third answer to your question is start small, start focused in so much as single category, single geography, get to liquidity and then grow organically from there.
Yeah.
I think is highly valid. Now, interestingly, the US equivalent to our business, albeit 10 times the value, in fact more, started with 1,000 categories in almost 10,000 geographies.
Wow. Is this Thumbtack?
This is Thumbtack.
Okay.
But what they did differently is they used Craigslist to seed supply.
Wow.
And so they went out to the supply base and said, hey, we can get you a listing on Craigslist for free. And that way they managed to seed the supply base.
Yep.
They talked about, one of their investors talked about come for the tools and stay for the network. And I see a lot of value in that. So I think you can do it both ways. I think, for instance, if we had a stronger trading post, for instance, and maybe we had leveraged that, we could have gone out in a similar fashion, but we didn't. And so having a neater, tidier target pool is valid in so much as you can build liquidity, create the arbitrage, grow organically from there.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And as a leader, I mean, coming into a business like this, how did you prioritize, or how are you prioritizing on where to start? You know, with a mature business, it's not day one. It's not as clean and easy to make those decisions. Yeah,
it's kind of tough. Look, I think what I saw, and this is, of course, is a real journey for us. So I was 6 months and 3 days in the business now.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. And so this, I think there's a couple of things. So first of all, there is a cultural question. So this business has grown rapidly and on the back of two very passionate founders. And so that tends to grow around a theme, and that theme in our case is family. Family is really tough. Families can be hiding places for underperformance, and so it was important to me to move from the ethic of a family towards the ethos of a team. And so how do we think about being a high performance discipline culture? That's been a really tough journey for the business. Now, in the last couple of days, our second 6 monthly NPS has been published. And we've seen a real lift in Net Promoter for the business. And so our how long do you intend to hang around, folks who said less than 6 months has gone from 18% to 11%. Wow. So, you know, that's a really big win for us. Yeah, a really big shift. And so I'm really proud that we've made a lot of change and we've done so in a way that's preserved culture and engagement. The second big area is how we focus our energies all up. So the strategic initiative. We have shifted in the last 6 months from being a business that's focused on consumer to a business that's focused on business. So how do we help the supply find new customers, not how do we help customers find supply? And so that's been a really fundamental shift for us. We've also changed from being a sales and marketing business to being a technology business. And so our tech business, our tech team has gone from 20% of the headcount to nearly 60%. 58% of the headcount are now focused on R&D. Wow. And so again, that's a really big and fundamental shift. So we've gone from having 28 salespeople to now having 4.
So with all this movement, and it's a lot of change for a company of this size in such a quick period, how do you manage the culture and adapt the culture at the same time? I mean, as a leader, that's got to be an awkward juggle.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't know that I've got the answers. I think we've been incredibly lucky that the management team, the executive team in the business we've hired really well. Yeah. And so we've hired people who've got, excuse me, we've got an innate capability to lead and to manage. Yeah. And for me, management is about starting with a culture of discipline. And so how do you do that? And that's really difficult. And it's not about what time do you arrive in the morning, and it's not about how much time do you spend playing ping pong, but it's about the degree to which we see people take advantage of autonomy and flexibility, and how do we rein that back in. We also talk about, as many do, I think Meg Whitman talked about having seats on the bus. You know, we've only got so many seats on the bus, and each one of those seats is precious. And so we need to have an incredibly high standard through the recruitment process, but also as we think about performance management. How do we tolerate underperformance? How do we think about that? How clear have we made each role in the business? I think folks would still say that this is, I say a journey is a bit of a euphemism to say that we're clearly not there yet, but I think folks would say that we are, at least directionally, we're getting there, or at least we're moving the right way.
Oh, that's the hope, right? It's, you don't want to find out 6 months later you've been heading the wrong way, but by the sound of it, you guys are doing all the right things to head in that direction.
I hope so. We've got some great leaders in the business, and so I'm really proud that we've managed to find a collection of people who care passionately about being good managers and leaders, and that's such an awesome place to start.
Definitely. So how do you attract people like that as a brand that's not, as you're saying, not so well known, to say, hey, this is a great place to work, we're coming on this journey, do you want to come with us and create some change?
Yeah, look, I think that's also interesting that to some extent I think it's about the profile of the individuals. And so how do we think about our own personal profiles on LinkedIn, for instance, and how you know, what do we talk about? How engaged are we in the interview process? How engaged am I in the interview process? How welcoming can we be? You know, we've struggled a little bit with having negative feedback on things like Glassdoor, which is not unusual, especially in a business that's going through a lot of change.
Yes.
But I've responded to every piece of feedback we've had, and I've tried to be highly authentic about that, and take time to be personal and just try and deliver a genuine response. And if I'm disappointed, if a review stings, then it stings, and I've just got to make sure that's clear. So I think folks now who look at Oneflare as a potential employer will look at a broad set in their research journey. You know, we've got 5.5% unemployment in Australia, and I think in our cohort we've probably got less than one of metro-based professional people, and so it's very much a buyer's market.
Yes.
So
that's actually questions. Yes.
Yeah. So it's very much a buyer's market. We've got to be careful. Folks are on a research journey when they think about working with us, and so we need to give them lots of opportunity to try and figure out what we're really like as a company.
Yeah, definitely. So from our experience with you guys, you've been a very authentic leader from day one. You know, all interactions are, this either works or it doesn't.
Sure.
Feedback, good, bad, this is kind of how we operate. How do you instill with, you know, all the challenges that you have been going through and ahead as a startup, how do you remain authentic that whole way through? I mean, that's got to be a struggle as well.
Yeah, I don't know that that's...
From your experience, it might be.
I think what's hard is trying to maintain a veneer. I think is very difficult. I think being authentic is not hard at all. I think you've just got to allow yourself to be subsumed by it and say, you know, I'm just going to be an authentic person. I want to be honest with folks. I want to tell folks when it's hard and I'm struggling.
Yeah.
And I want to be happy when I'm happy. I want to just show a broad range of emotions and kind of be okay with that.
Yeah.
Now, some folks would probably rather I was a bit more
hand wavy,
but it's just not my thing.
Yeah, fair enough. And I mean, the startup community around the world struggles with this balance of the sales pitch, the hustle, but then also creating that authentic conversation. So there's not, you know, there's a lot of challenges around mental health and dealing with these sorts of ups and downs of startups. Yeah. How do you manage your own headspace going through all these sorts of things?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think fundamentally, you know, I happen to belong to a large family unit with 4 children, so we've got a lot to think about outside of work. But otherwise, you know, I think the thing that we battle with most, and I'm describing a group of people, and tell me if this isn't right, is whether or not we're right, whether or not our instinct is right. And oftentimes you'll go through a period where there are no optics to support your decision making, and you've got to have real faith. But you've also got to empower other folks to be honest with you. And I think I do that. I feel like I'm very much part of a cohesive team where we all have the ability to step up and say, I think that's not right. I don't think that's the right approach for us. And I would certainly, for one, you know, I'm sufficiently insecure to want to take that feedback from anyone. Yeah. We also have a great board. So our board is highly engaged. I can call on any of our board members and feel good that they'll give me honest feedback. Yeah. And so those types of aspects are really important, I think, to help you feel less isolated. They do say that running a company is one of the most isolating roles you can have, which I get.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the element of a board, do you find that that's been helpful at the stage of business that you're at, or do you think it's important for startups to get that in as a, you know, an advisory board or a structured board as early as possible? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, as a CEO, you're really having to manage yourself. Am I the best person for the job? Am
Sure.
I focusing on the right things? Do we have the right team? You know, how do you keep improving what you're doing?
Yeah.
Where would you say is the best point to bring in someone to manage a CEO at the end of the day?
Well, I think there's two or three things on that I should say. One is because I was recruited into the role, I can feel confident that today I am the right guy for the job.
Yes.
At least the board feels that way. Now that may change at any point, but right now,
5 minutes.
yeah. Secondly, is I've worked with early stage who've surrounded themselves with a very healthy suite of advisors. I think that's incredibly useful. I think there is a risk of 1 or 2 person echo chambers putting mortgages on the line for crappy ideas, or even good ideas and poor execution. I've seen a lot of businesses put a lot on the line for not a lot of an idea, and so that's really concerning. So having an honest suite of advisors who can be truly independent to call bullshit, super helpful.
Yeah.
When I worked with Kmart, which is way at the other end of the spectrum, I was brought in as an advisor to help them with their digital journey, and that was incredibly useful, I think, for that business. So the feedback at the time was it was useful. And so I can see how having an independent set of advisors can really help you form the right approach. You know, to what extent that moves from advisor to board director. You know, board directors obviously come primarily with fiduciary duties, and no board director should sign up, you know, without thinking deeply about that. But I think there is in terms of the ability to generate good advice, I think there is a marginal difference between an advisor and a board director.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And do you think that there's a certain point where you should switch between advisors and a structured board?
Well, I mean, structured board, fundamentally the business should be paying the board, and the board should share in those fiduciary duties. So there is a point at which it's right to have a board, a paid board, professional board. At the same time, it's probably a bit of an overhead for small businesses, and they shouldn't do it just for the prestige of having certain advisors or certain board directors.
Yep, no, that makes sense. And from, I mean, Sydney startup community, there's a lot of hype, obviously, at the moment with the new startup space. It's going to be on York Street, so there'll be neighbours.
Sure.
There's a lot of investment talk. There's, you know, the government's getting involved, or, you know, Tech Sydney, all those sorts of things. What's your view on the landscape, you know, for the investments being made, the new startups coming through? You know, do we have a sophisticated community?
Look, I think we do, but I've got to say, even though I've spent 4 or 5 years with Innovation Bay, for instance, as part of their review committee, whatever we call it. And
Ian, by the way.
I've always felt like I've looked and peered into the startup ecosystem from the outside. I've never really truly felt like a founder. And so even though I've founded my own unsuccessful startups, which should qualify me, you know, because I've lost money on scraps and bruises, I've never properly felt like I was part of the ecosystem. And so I think, but from the outside, it looks pretty good. I do get concerned when I see rows of folks. I use the term mortgages on the line, but rows of folks who have put a lot on the line and aren't necessarily putting themselves in a position to get the right advice. So back to your point about advisors, putting themselves in a position to get the right advice about whether or not they should really pursue this, or if they should go back to a corporate role. You know, we talk about a turn in the economy, a turn in the housing market, and we should all be concerned at what our economic future looks like. And so, you know, go hard or go home, I think might be the answer to some of these folks. It seems to be, let me put it this way, startup ecosystem in Australia can look a little bit like a lifestyle choice, and that always worries me. I never want to see that. Yeah,
fair enough. And from your point of view, with the different businesses you've started and the scrapes and bruises, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned?
Oh, persistence. Absolute persistence. I think there have been at least 2 fundamentally valid ideas that I've let run through my fingers through a lack of persistence. Yeah, there was, there was one terrific business that I had a licensing arrangement with American Express, and the idea was that those guys were going to acquire the business, and for one reason or another, it didn't happen, and it didn't happen very late, and I've got to say, my head went down, and I just couldn't pick it back up again. But had I done so, had I persevered, had I looked elsewhere for tweaks to the model, I would have seen, I think, a very valid core business. Yep. I had also reached a point where I was a little bit too sensitive about putting too much of my own personal sort of economic security at risk. Right. So I think that's part of it too. Yeah. And I think if you're not willing to go all in, you probably shouldn't bother.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I didn't bother.
And hindsight's a funny thing.
That's right.
So corporates and startups or tech businesses, how important do you think is the relationship there?
Yeah, over time, increasingly important. I think when we started talking maybe 5 years ago about the innovator's dilemma, and folks started to get it, and folks like Pollenizer came along and said, hey, big corporate, we're going to help you be more innovative. I think there was a really important shift towards innovation thinking and design thinking within big companies. And so then how did those big companies embrace startup ideals? I think there's a ton of opportunity. So we've seen from the banks, with Reinventure, for instance, their willingness to embrace, also with Muru-D. So I think we're seeing a migration path. We're seeing a bit of a shift. I'll be interested to see how far that goes. There's also an interesting example a few weeks ago when Domain released a whole bunch of public APIs so that startups can tap into their data, which is another interesting shift towards a more openness.
Yes. And you obviously Oneflare's invested in by Domain. How does that relationship work so that both sides get value, obviously besides the business doing well?
Yeah, look, it's great. One thing that is true today is that there is an imbalance between the extent to which Oneflare has brand on the line versus Domain. Domain has got a big and well-known brand. They are absolutely the underdog right now in the real estate market, doing a phenomenal job. Yep. Apparently Australia's #1 property app, which is great. And
they're saying no, not apparently.
No, 100% true. So they've got a terrific amount on the line. Yeah. And so we've got to be enterprise grade before we properly integrate with that business. But I think we've got a terrific roadmap of opportunity. Definitely. Whereas someone's looking through rental properties or whatnot, we can be there talking about servicing, lawn cleaning, removalists.
There's an obvious integration there.
Huge amount of opportunity.
Yeah, massively. So we've got a question I'm going to try and read off the screen. So apologies for my nose, guys. From earlier, you spoke about changing the recruitment process so that you're more involved. What does the new recruitment process look like at Oneflare, and what does the onboarding process look like?
Wow. So recruitment process. So we use some agencies where required. I think agencies can be super helpful. I think that's been a really difficult undertaking for a company of our size because it is an expensive process. However, mishiring is also an expensive process. There are certain roles like product managers, for instance, data scientists, of which we have many. Those roles are incredibly difficult to hire for. And so you can bash your head on Seek all day long, and the likelihood is you're just not going to find the right candidate. So we have an inclination to use agencies for some roles. Otherwise, we'll go our own way. We currently pay to use the LinkedIn premium product, whatever that is.
Do you find that useful?
No. No.
Subtle, okay. No,
I don't. Look, it's a lot of money.
Isn't it like 10 grand?
20 as far as I know. Yeah, so it's a lot of money. I think, I've got some friends at LinkedIn, so I'm going to reserve what I say next, but I don't expect we'll be paying for that for long. But, so we've tried LinkedIn, we've tried a bit of Bamboo, we've tried Glassdoor, we've tried a whole bunch of different ways. Fundamentally, we own a business called word of mouth, and I think that's what works. I think word of mouth works. Yeah. And so Tech Sydney, for instance, has been really useful. So our VP of Engineering, James Martin, was one of the founders of Tech Sydney, and I think that's a great environment, for instance, to be finding talent, and then plus just word of mouth effects. Yeah. So that was the recruitment process. Now that all sounds a little bit ambiguous, but it's really we have a $3,000 referral bonus to staff should they refer someone who hangs around. We have a couple of agencies involved in some roles, and then we have our word of mouth. And then when people are onboarded, so we had a new senior QA arrive today, and the onboarding process is nearly a week long. It's effectively
they get kidnapped and
they get kidnapped.
Join the cult, get a tattoo.
They've got to listen to the phone calls that come in through our support team, listen to the sales guys, basically just become immersed in the business. So it's a fairly open culture, I think, and the idea is just to get people immersed as quickly as we can. Yeah,
definitely. And perks-wise, I mean, there's so many crazy perks out there from the other tech giants in Sydney. How do you guys compete with that?
Yeah, look, I mean, we do, I thought long and hard before we offered free breakfast.
Yep.
We sort of offered free breakfast as a strategic advantage because I think we will never have more than 20% of the staff of our largest competitor because we're a tech company, not a sales and marketing business. So breakfast will always cost us five times less.
Yep.
So we offer free breakfast. We've got fairly flexible hours.
What time is breakfast?
Breakfast finishes apparently by 9:30.
Okay.
But we did get some feedback recently that people don't often make it.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I've been 8 to 8:30. You'll get everyone in early.
I've been known to have some fruit toast in the afternoon. It's fine. Yeah, whatever.
Rebellious,
works.
Right?
Completely crazy. Yeah.
Fair enough. And so, you're a team trying to make them all, managing each other. That 360 feedback's got to be quite important.
It's really important.
How do you guide that between other staff members? It's easy, as the leader of a business, to go, hey, this is what we expect. But then how do you make sure that flow-on effect actually happens in the day-to-day?
Sure. I think the idea primarily is for people to know that they should meet often. That there should be a solid framework around which people can perform and know they're performing. Once you meet, it's about having a productive conversation about behaviours as well as about KPIs. And we've actually, I think from next week, we implement a program out of the Big Red group called Ready.
Oh, great.
Which is about rewarding and recognising staff peer-to-peer and 360 as well. So we're going to roll that out as a way of incentivising people, just to give a pat in the back or some reward points.
I have to tag Andrea Culligan, by the way.
Yeah, she's been great. She's been really good. Yeah. So, but that's a decent sized investment for a business of our size, and we're super keen to make sure people feel loved and recognised, and giving them a platform to do that, I think is going to be really useful.
Definitely. And for the future, what's happening with Oneflare? Are you guys ambitious to go overseas, or is it about really having a stakeholder here in Australia, or what's next?
So we've got a lot to do here. I mean, our view is there's about 9.3 million households in Australia. We think each household has 7 or 8 jobs a year they outsource. Electrician, plumber, removalist, accountant, and so that's 75 million jobs.
Yes,
a lot of jobs. Right now, about 500,000 jobs come to platforms like ours, and so our non-user base is very, very significant. Yes. We think that's where all the opportunity is for some time to come. So we've no real overseas ambition today. I think we've got just a lot to do. Yeah. We also participate in 110 categories. Seriously, there are many more. And so how we think about moving horizontally, becoming more deep in certain categories that we're already successful and have liquidity. So there's lots of ways that we can grow and move before we need to think about elsewhere. Yeah, there's a lot to do.
There always is. So, lucky last question. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Superpower?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, you know what? I think the number one superpower that I think we'd all like to try for a wee while is invisibility, but I'm not sure if there's some weird...
Is it because of Harry Potter, invisibility cloak, or...
I've never seen Harry Potter. Yeah, I don't know.
Wait, what?
Yeah, sorry.
I don't know if we can be friends anymore.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Genuinely apologise. But, so I think probably invisibility, and then we'll just go back to that. I'm sorry. But then, speed is the other one.
Yeah, speed would be good.
Speed would be great.
A lot of people talk about time travel as well, so being able to regain time.
Is that a superpower?
Yeah, well, I mean...
Only when Superman's, flew around the Earth.
True. A lot of us are a bit young for that version of the movie, but... But hey, your kids are going to be watching Harry Potter soon, surely.
I think one of them may have seen a movie, but I wasn't there.
Fair enough. well, movie marathons to come. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Great.
Guys, check out Oneflare, and yeah, look forward to catching up shortly.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jen.
Bye, guys.